Eleider Alvarez captures the WBO World Light Heavyweight title with a 7th round TKO upset victory over Sergey Kovalev in Atlantic City, New Jersey. Let's talk about it. Now, going into this fight, Alvarez was a guy who was widely respected by the boxing public. Widely respected without being highly touted. You know, nobody was really saying Alvarez is the next big thing. He's going to take over the division. No, people respected him because why? Alvarez always showed a good jab, good athleticism, fast hands, nice defense, just good technically all round. He was a big light heavyweight, decent punching power, nothing special, but decent, and a willingness to step in there and face the best. For all these reasons, the boxing public respected Alvarez without really, seeing him as the second coming. And obviously Alvarez had beaten who's put in front of him. He beat the likes of Jean Pascal, Lucien Boutte in decisive fashion. But those were guys who were kind of over the hill. So Alvarez hadn't done anything in terms of who he'd beat that particularly impressed anyone. In terms of the opposition. He beat who put in front of him. You can't argue with the fashion in which he beat those guys, but he'd never beaten anyone who was young, in their prime, and relevant in the light heavyweight division. That's what I mean to say. So Alvarez respected, but he wasn't really blowing the public away with his performances or what he was doing. But Kovalev, on the other hand, there were some questions. For me, there were still questions after the Andre Ward fights. Questions about his stamina, and also questions about his desire in a tough fight. Because Sergey Kovalev, to me, in that rematch of Andre Ward, even though he was hit low a lot, he was also hit with legitimate punches, which hurt him. And he, to me, looked like a typical bully in the Andre Ward rematch. When things weren't going his way, his whole body language changed, his facial expression changed. And rather than bite down on a gum shield and battle through, he capitulated mentally. And so even though he came back and fought Shabransky, and is it Shabransky that he fought? I forget the name. I don't think it was Shabransky. What was the guy's name? Yeah, it was Shabransky. He fought Shabransky and he fought McCalkin. These were not guys who were able to test Sergey Kovalev's will, to test his heart. And they weren't really able to test him that much technically either. Whereas Eleider Alvarez, he was able to test Sergey Kovalev technically, and that's not a surprise. Isaac Chilemba tested Sergey Kovalev technically. And this fight actually resembled the Isaac Chilemba fight in the early rounds, with Eleider Alvarez doing a lot of moving, and Kovalev, Kovalev has always had defensive frailties. And his defensive frailties were actually exposed even more here than they were against Andre Ward. Why? Because Alvarez, similar to Chilemba, has a longer reach than Ward and appeared to have longer arms than Kovalev too. In fact, the reach here of Alvarez is 75.5. I'm sure that's longer than Sergey Kovalev's reach. It is indeed. Sergey Kovalev 72.5. So Alvarez had the longer reach. He was jabbing Kovalev's head off, actually, at points in this fight. A very hard jab, and again, Alvarez is known for a good jab. That's one thing that most people know about him. He's a very good, fast jab. His athleticism also showed up in the early rounds in this fight. He just looked much faster than Kovalev. So what you were dealing with here was a guy in Alvarez who's actually more technically sound than Kovalev, from a defensive point of view at least. And obviously, Alvarez is going in there thinking, I need to be defensively sound. Even though he's always had a good defense, he's thinking, I need to be extra defensively sound because Kovalev is a serious puncher. Whereas Kovalev has the arrogance of a puncher. So he's going in there, strutting his stuff, thinking, I don't need to worry about what's coming back too much. That's how he was. Well, that's how he's been through most of his career. He's not that worried about what's coming back because he normally intimidates the other guy with his power. And in my mind, the outcome of this fight really would come down to power. Because Alvarez, yes, is technically better than Kovalev. He's well-schooled and all that kind of stuff. But Kovalev has a way of nullifying all that with his power. It's not like Kovalev is just a brute without any skill. He has skill. okay? But defensively, you knew going into the fight that Alvarez was a guy with more defensive skill. A very well-schooled boxer, a guy who's fast. But you're probably thinking, well, Kovalev is going to get to him with that power at some stage, and then Alvarez will capitulate. Yeah, Kovalev might get outboxed here and there. He was against Chilemba. He lost some rounds against Chilemba getting outboxed. But ultimately against Chilemba, he managed to catch him, and he managed to, win the fight down the stretch. He went to points. So that's maybe what most people were expecting. That's probably what I was expecting. But that wasn't to be the case. Alvarez was able to build on his early lead. And by the way, HBO really have got to fire Harold Lederman. Like, he is no longer capable of doing his job effectively, because he was the only one out of the HBO team that had Sergey Kovalev winning the fight all the way through. I think after 6 rounds, Harold Lederman had given Eleider Alvarez 1 round. Extraordinary. When Max Kellerman said Eleider Alvarez is pitching a shutout here. I don't know what Harold Lederman was watching, whether he was sipping his gin or whiskey underneath the desk while he was watching the fight. I got no idea what he was doing there, but it was clear that Eleider Alvarez was outboxing Sergey Kovalev. His defense was better. He was making Kovalev miss a lot. Again, it was similar to the Chilemba fight where the jabs were rocking Kovalev's head back. Kovalev was coming forward, looking a bit frustrated, but this was a bit different to the Chilemba fight because Alvarez does hit a bit harder than Chilemba, and he's sharper than Chilemba. Chilemba got long arms, but he's not that fast, not as fast as Alvarez. And Alvarez Chilemba, by the way, that was a tough fight. But yeah, Alvarez was doing a very good job of his jab, defensively moving around, making Kovalev miss. And this is something I tell a lot of fighters, people having their first amateur fights, or people who are unsure going into any particular fight, is when you're unsure, concentrate on your defense. Concentrate on making the other guy miss. Because if you can concentrate on making the other guy miss, that's half of the job done. Because when he's missing, he's going to often lose confidence. When he's missing, he's going to get tired more quickly. Make the other guy miss and stick to the basics. The jab, make sure you're blocking his shots. Use your legs to keep him off balance. Just, try and keep it as simple as possible and stay disciplined. Don't try to do anything too fancy if you're unsure. Now, I'm not saying Alvarez was unsure, but he stuck to that particular strategy. He stuck to the basics. And when you've got 2 guys with a good jab, but one guy has longer arms and faster hands and a better defense, he's often going to be the one landing the jab and making the other guy miss his jab. And that's what Alvarez was doing. He had longer arms, faster hands, better defense. He was jabbing, and then he'd pull out of the way and miss Kovalev's jab. Or sometimes he'd miss Kovalev's jab first, by pulling out the way, then he'd step in with his own jab, and Kovalev's head would go flying back. How on earth Harold Lederman missed these moments, I've got no idea. He kept saying that Kovalev was landing the cleaner shots. What? In the 4th round, I think it was, after getting outboxed for several, it might be the 3rd round. It was either the 3rd or the 4th round. After being outboxed for several rounds, Kovalev came out at a high tempo, decided to put his foot on the gas and try to put some hurting on Eleider Alvarez. And he had to, because the fight was starting to get out of hand for him. So he came forward, he started attacking, and he did have some success, but Alvarez was defiant under that kind of pressure. He wasn't mentally rattled or anything like that. He was defiant, and he was like, yeah, come on, let's go. Let's go. You want to fight? Let's fight. But he didn't get drawn into a slugfest. Here's the thing. He kept on doing what he was doing. He just upped his own tempo, right? So while Kovalev was throwing more shots at him, Alvarez was slipping and countering even more. He just took his game to a next level. Now, he did have to weather a bit of a storm, because that round where Kovalev came out, with a higher tempo, I think he won that round. And Kovalev may have won a couple rounds in the fight. But he succeeded in making Kovalev miss most of his punches. Even though Kovalev did land a few here and there, which Alvarez took well and was able to ride them well, he succeeded in making Kovalev miss a lot. And we know that Kovalev has had this stamina issue. And Kovalev was fighting at a far higher tempo in that round, and he was forcing his punches, by the way. This was not Sergey Kovalev flowing. You know when he's flowing and the punches are just coming out fluidly? No, this wasn't like that. This was Kovalev getting outboxed and thinking, you know what, I need to do something to turn this tide. So he came out and he really forced his work. That's how it looked, like he was forcing it. And he did have some success, but not as much success as he wanted. He wanted a knockdown. He wanted an intimidated opponent, but that's not what he had. The fight continued. And that attack, I think, in that round took a lot out of Kovalev in terms of his stamina. He continued trying to press forward. He did land some nice jabs here and there in the subsequent rounds. But Alvarez, you could tell just from the body language, had more energy because he hadn't expended himself the way Kovalev had with that big attack. Alvarez was fighting almost within himself for the first few rounds. Even though he was outboxing Kovalev, because he was being conservative, because he was picking his shots well, he was making Kovalev do all the work. So Alvarez was preserving his energy. He still had plenty left in the tank. And that became very, very apparent by the 5th and 6th and then going into the 7th round that Alvarez had more in the tank. His legs just had more spring in them. He wasn't dropping his hands the way Kovalev was. And the big round, obviously, Alvarez kept landing big shots. I think at the end of the 6th round, he landed a very good right hand when Kovalev seemed to be coming on strong. But then in the 7th round, that's when the breakthrough came. Eleider Alvarez landed a big right hand, I think followed by a left too. And down went Sergey Kovalev. He was hurt, but he was also tired. It was a combination of fatigue and, the concussive effects of the punch. He went down. The crowd were gasping. They were shocked. Kovalev got up and he tried to fight back. But again, this is another issue of Kovalev. Because he's such an on-top fighter, because he's such a puncher, he's not used to having to survive. And this is often what you see with out-and-out punchers like him. I mean, let me not say he's an out-and-out puncher, but he's an out-and-out puncher in terms of his mentality. He can box, but his mentality is an out-and-out puncher. Okay? Like Mike Tyson, when Tyson got beat by Buster Douglas. In fact, Tyson in all his defeats, did Tyson ever show any true survival skills? No. He's not used to being in that position. His mind doesn't even think in terms of survival. His mind thinks in terms of attack and destroy. So when you get one of these, extremely prolific punchers who's used to bullying people like a Tyson or a Kovalev, when the shoe is on the other foot and they're hurt, they really don't have great survival skills. The pair of them just tried to fight back. Rather than hold on, rather than move away, rather than do this, that, or the other, they're just trying to fight back. And that was obviously the worst thing that Sergey Kovalev could have done in this particular situation. This is a fight that Kovalev really had to implement strategy because he was in there with a guy who's technically good, who's defensively sound, who's big, who has a longer reach than him, who has a faster jab. With a guy like that, you can't just go in hoping to overpower him. You have to have enough respect for his skills to actually fight a technical fight and a strategic fight. Even though it may be frustrating at points, you have to be patient. Because if you go in there, and especially if you go in there when you're hurt, right, and you're just trying to rush forward and try to land something on the guy, you're going to get taken out because he had plenty left in the tank. And I know it's much easier to say than to actually experience. It's easy for me to sit on the outside. Oh, Kovalev should have done this, that, and the other. It's very different if I was in there against Alvarez, obviously. But when Kovalev goes back and looks at his performance, these are probably the things that him or his coach or whoever may realize or point out that, in a situation like this with a guy who's as technically good as this, you can't be reacting this way when you're hurt. You got to have a bit more respect for the guy. He had plenty left in the tank. He's technically good, so on and so forth. So Kovalev's survival skills are just not there. And we saw that against Ward. We've seen that here. So anyway, got up after the first knockdown. Was, bludgeoned to the floor again with more heavy shots. Got up for a second time. Same thing. Finally went down again. And the fight was over. I think the referee waved it off, or Kovalev get off? I think the referee waved it off. So it was a TKO, yeah, because the ref waved it off. And that's all she wrote in the 7th round. So pretty big upset. Not many people predicted it. Most people were predicting Kovalev to win. Understandably so. I think people expected a fairly competitive fight for a few rounds, but ultimately Kovalev's punching power, his viciousness would intimidate and get to Alvarez before long. But no, it wasn't to be. Kovalev's stamina issues showed up again. His arrogance issues showed up again, truth be told, because he's a very arrogant guy. He has said that John David Jackson taught him nothing. And, he's acted as though he now has a real trainer who is going to take him to the next level. But instead, he gets knocked out in 7 rounds by Eleider Alvarez with his new trainer. So maybe John David Jackson was right all along, and that the problem is Sergey Kovalev. The problem is his arrogance, his overconfidence, all this kind of stuff, his belligerence, And maybe Kovalev will look at himself now and realize the mistakes he made. Then again, maybe not. Maybe he's finished. Maybe he's one of those bully type fighters who, once they get a taste of their own medicine, they're never the same again. And I did say after the Ward fight that I was interested to see Kovalev's heart tested, because Shabransky and Mikhalkin, they never managed to test Kovalev's heart, or test him from a technical point of view either. That's what I wanted to see, to find out whether Kovalev had recovered from the Andre Ward defeat. I wanted to see him in there with a guy who was going to hit him back and put some pressure on him, and then we'll see if he's recovered. And we found out here, well, I'm not even sure if we found out that he hasn't recovered, but we found out that he certainly hasn't become stronger mentally or in terms of his stamina. Those areas of his game haven't improved. That's what we know for sure. So at the very least, they haven't improved, and maybe they've deteriorated following the Ward loss. Is this the end of Sergey Kovalev? I think his confidence is going to take a massive hit from this third defeat, sorry. It's going to take a massive hit from this, and obviously a lot of fighters now are going to be very confident going in there with Kovalev. They're going to replicate the same kind of strategy that Eleider Alvarez used, and it's a similar strategy to Andre Ward. Get the guy tired. The guy appears to have stamina problems. Is Kovalev on the vodka again? That was the rumor for a long time, that he was on the vodka. Virgil Hunter and Andre Ward talked about this, that he was a guy who was out there not really living the life, who was arrogant and complacent, so on and so forth, and wasn't really the consummate professional that an Andre Ward was. So is he still like that now? Has he convinced himself that the issue was John David Jackson, and now he can go back to drinking vodka again with his new trainer? Because that's what the real problem was, not the vodka. I don't know. Or maybe he's not on vodka. Maybe, maybe it was just his limitations as a fighter showing up, both mental, physical, and technical. Let me know how you feel about this fight in the comment section below. Alvarez's performance. Alvarez boxed fantastically. It was almost a perfect performance by Alvarez from a technical and strategic point of view. He broke Kovalev down gradually. He used his physical attributes very, very well. Alvarez, 6 feet tall, 75.5-inch reach, used the reach to perfection. Hand speed, the great jab that he's always had. Mixed in some body shots here and there, but not too many. He certainly didn't go to the body as much as Andre Ward did. It was more headshots than the jab that he was concentrating on and making Kovalev miss. And a very physically strong man too, Eleider Alvarez. So yeah, great performance by him. And, you have to give credit to Sergey Kovalev for fighting Eleider Alvarez, because this is something that Adonis Stevenson didn't want to do. And now maybe we know why Adonis Stevenson didn't want to fight this man. And Alvarez is based in Canada. Has Alvarez sparred Adonis Stevenson? Because we know he fought the other 2 Canadian light heavyweights in Jean Pascal and Lucien Boutte, and took care of both of them in good fashion. Is that why Adonis Stevenson was worried about Alvarez? Or have they sparred, and did Alvarez, give Stevenson the business in the sparring? Because Stevenson appeared to have absolutely no interest in fighting this man whatsoever. Pretty extraordinary the way he ducked this man for so long. It was a very, very strange thing. Alvarez, 34 years of age himself, so he's only a year younger than Kovalev. But again, this shows that in boxing, you're often only as old as the number of fights you've had and the amount of punishment you've taken. Both mental and physical punishment. Now, obviously, you're not going to find some guy taking up boxing at 40 and becoming a 50-year-old world champion. That's not going to happen. But in relative terms, all right, You could get a guy who's 34 and fresh because he ain't had many fights and then ain't taken much punishment, and yet at the same time have another guy who's 34 or 35 and be physically and mentally shot because they've just been through the mill in boxing. They've taken so much punishment, because boxing will age you prematurely from an athletic point of view. I mean, look at David Haye. Yeah. Now, he hasn't taken that much punishment in terms of head punches in his career, David Haye, but the punishment that his body has taken, his legs, his back, his arms, his shoulders from all the training camps and the fights and all that kind of stuff, David Haye is physically shot. What is he, 37, 38, David Haye? He's physically shot. But there are other guys at that age who are not physically shot, who haven't maybe had as tougher training camps and so on and so forth. Maybe their bodies are a bit more robust, So it really does show that it's not just the age that you have to look at in boxing. It's the number of fights and how much punishment a guy has taken in order to determine how fresh he's going to be or how much longer he's going to have in the sport. Kovalev at this point, with the 3 defeats, 2 by knockout, it may be over for him. And it will take some tremendous mental strength for Kovalev to come back from this and remain a top contender or a champion in the light heavyweight division. Will he consider moving up to cruiserweight? Because that's something he talked about after the second Andre Ward defeat. I don't think that would be a good idea. I think he would find it even tougher at cruiserweight than he has at light heavyweight. And he looked small in there against Alvarez, I mean, I don't want to say small, but he looked a smaller man to me. His body didn't look as big as Alvarez is. He just didn't look as quite a big as a human being. So, yeah, I don't think that would be a good move. But hey, that's his decision. And it's going to be a very, very tough road back for Sergey Kovalev. Maybe he's finished. I guess we'll wait. We'll have to wait and see. And this also shows how overhyped Kovalev has been. Now, when I say overhyped, I don't use overhyped in the same sense that a lot of other people use it. Because a lot of other people use the word overhyped and they say, oh, that means you're saying the fight is not good. No, Kovalev is a fantastic fighter. He's been a fantastic champion. But when people were saying, some people, not most people, but some people were saying, oh, Kovalev's right up there with the greatest light heavyweights of all time and this, that, and the other. No, he's not. Okay? Kovalev had a long way to go before he could be regarded in the same light as a Bob Foster. Okay? Or, many of the other great light heavyweights over the years. A light heavyweight who is often slept on. I mean, there's Michael Spinks, obviously, many light heavyweights over the years. But a light heavyweight who's often slept on in terms of how devastating a puncher he was and the reign that he had on the light heavyweight division was Michael Moorer. And I remember saying to several people that Michael Moorer was a more devastating puncher than Sergey Kovalev when Michael Moorer was a light heavyweight champion. And certain people looking at me sideways like, what are you talking about? Because they don't think about Michael Moorer, the light heavyweight. They think about Michael Moorer getting knocked out by George Foreman, getting stopped by Holyfield in the rematch at heavyweight. That's their perception of Michael Moorer. But Michael Moorer as a light heavyweight was a devastating puncher. And he was beating the living crap out of people at light heavyweight. And he had a pretty lengthy run as light heavyweight champion. The only thing is, back then, Michael Moorer was WBO champion and the WBO was relatively lightly regarded. But the other champions in the division, when Michael Moorer was light heavyweight champion, were not that keen on fighting him. All right, so he kind of was the Kovalev of his day, but I would say even more intimidating and more devastating than Kovalev, because Michael Moorer was very technically sound as a light heavyweight, had tremendous punching power for a light heavyweight, and nobody really wanted to go near him. So that's why he eventually moved up to heavyweight and whatnot. So that's what I mean. People were going a little bit overboard with Kovalev in terms of how good he was. But that's the same with most fighters who have any kind of following. You get a contingent of hardcore fans who follow that fighter that go overboard when it comes to their praise of him. And that's really what overhyped means to me, is when people go overboard. But going overboard and praising a certain fighter don't necessarily mean the fighter's rubbish. The fighter could still be a fantastic fighter. The fighter could still be an all-time great and be overhyped by his core fan base. You understand what I'm saying? So when you hear me use the term overhyped, Don't take it as me saying I'm saying the guy's rubbish. No. Other people use the term in that way. I use it in, I think, the more correct way. All right. Anyway, let me stop waffling here, people. Very interesting fight. For those of you who haven't seen it, I recommend you go watch Sergey Kovalev versus Eleider Alvarez. Is there a rematch clause in the contract? That's what we need to know. Will Sergey Kovalev get an immediate rematch? If there is a rematch clause in the contract, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that Kovalev probably won't exercise the immediate rematch clause. And if he does, I think he's going to get beaten even worse in the immediate rematch than he was in the first fight, because he doesn't appear to be the most mentally robust guy. That's what I'll say. I'm not necessarily questioning his heart. I mean, it depends how you want to define heart. He certainly didn't quit in this fight. He got up and he tried to fight back, but his eyes just glaze over when he's in trouble. And I know your eyes do glaze over when you get hit with a good shot, but I mean, no survival instincts kicked in. He just didn't know what to do when he was under pressure like that. Those skills have just not been taught to him. Or he hasn't been a good enough student to actually listen when people are trying to teach him survival skills. He's got this arrogance of a puncher. He was just a deer in the headlights when he was in trouble. And he's going to need to address that. He's going to need to find some serious survival skills very quickly if he's going to step into an immediate rematch with Eleider Alvarez. And I doubt that he can do that. I doubt he can do that. Will he even take the immediate rematch if he has one in the contract? Does he even have one in the contract? Has Kathy Duva had the wherewithal to put that in the contract? Because this is a voluntary defense. Eleider Alvarez was Stevenson's mandatory. It wasn't Kovalev's mandatory, as far as I'm aware. Kovalev's mandatory was Marcus Brown, right? Wasn't it Marcus Brown? Wasn't he Kovalev's mandatory? Unless they've switched it round and made Alvarez the mandatory at last minute, I don't know. But as far as I'm aware, Alvarez was not his mandatory. That means if it's a voluntary, Kovalev should have a rematch clause in the contract. Has Kathy Duva done her due diligence and made sure there was a rematch clause in there? Maybe some of you guys know. But let me know what you felt about the fight anyway. How far can Eleider Alvarez go? How do you see Alvarez doing against Bivol? I was going to say Stevenson, but is Stevenson ever going to fight this guy? After seeing that and after Stevenson's last performance, I think Stevenson will run even faster away from Eleider Alvarez than he already was running. But how will Alvarez do against the likes of Beterbiev, Bivol, etc.? Let me know in the comment section below. And also Vodcek, he's another one out there, right? So let me know how you think Alvarez is going to do against the other top light heavyweights. Apparently, Tunde Ajayi said that he and Anthony Yarde are going to be watching the Kovalev and Bivol fights very closely. Look, I'm nothing bad to say about Tunde Ajayi or Anthony Yarde. I think Anthony Yarde is a precocious talent. But the idea that they're anywhere close to stepping in with an Alvarez or a Bivol or a Kovalev or any of these guys, in my opinion, is laughable. Okay? Well, actually, now that Kovalev is lost, they might be thinking, can we take on a beaten Kovalev? I don't think they would, but that might be something they're just starting to entertain now. But in terms of the winners of last night's fights, they're not even remotely close to even thinking about putting Anthony Yarde in with one of those guys. So, like Tunde Ajayi has said himself many times, they're trying to get us while we're green. We're trying to get them when they're gray. So, anyway, let me know how you feel about everything I talked about in this video. It's happening. I'm out.